Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. You can find that on iTunes and my blog, drmikekuna.com, drmikekuna.com. But this is a Saving Savvy episode, and today we're going to talk about a device that all van dwellers, and in fact everyone beyond van dwellers, should have. It's cheap and it could save your life. But first, of course, I've got to tell you a story. So I'm an avid camper, and a few years ago built out a cargo van, which I now call Violet the Camper Van, and I use Violet to travel around the country and just enjoy nature. So recently I was in Wyoming in the Medicine Boat National Forest, an absolutely beautiful spot. I had nature around me. I literally had deer walking through my campsite. I had a hummingbird in my camper. I had a chipmunk jumping in and out. It was just like paradise, but there were really no amenities, including good cell phone reception. So with a booster, I was able to barely send a text message out, but I couldn't really do anything else with the internet. And I'll tell you that I have become very dependent on the internet over the last few years. I use it for my weather. I stream radio stations and TV channels through it. I watch movies on it. I listen to streaming music on it. I get my news on it. I really depend on the internet. But the internet is an incredibly vulnerable resource. So even a simple power outage would knock out the internet at my house because it all requires electricity. If I'm on the road and I'm not near enough to a cell tower, or if that cell tower is down for some reason, my internet on my phone doesn't work. So what do you do in situations like this? I really needed information. I was hiking and driving different places. I needed the weather. I needed to know the national news because this was during the COVID pandemic. This was also a time that the Sturgis motorcycle rally was going on, and I would be driving back through South Dakota exactly when that was occurring. I needed to know that about, and I needed to know local news. So I did have a resource. It wasn't a very fancy one, but it performed flawlessly. And let me show you what it was. It was this. This is an old Sony AM, FM, TV band radio. Now, this radio is so old, you have to remember that analog TV was discontinued in this country in 2009. So this radio is definitely older than that, probably about 15 years old, but it did have AM and FM. It also has weather band. And with those two main bands, I was able to get all the information that I needed, plus music, plus entertainment. It was a great device and something that was incredibly simple and incredibly portable. So I thought to myself, really, radio is so common, but is it so common in today's internet world? And so I polled around some of my friends, and most of them no longer have a working portable radio. They just don't use it. They use their phone, or they use like a smart speaker or whatever. They just don't have it. If I would have asked these same people 20 years ago, they all would have had a portable radio. It was just as necessary as having a television. But remember, the internet is very, very vulnerable. Radio is not. So I went on this mission to see what kind of radio people need and what you should buy. And I watched countless hours of videos on YouTube on radio reviews. And finally, I just went out and I just bought a bunch of radios. Now, I will tell you that I was a radio collector for most of my life, but haven't really bought many radios, if any radios, in the last 10 years or so. But radios are cheap. I can give these things away to family members and friends who would benefit from them. So what the heck? Why not do it? You benefit, they benefit. I get a little bit of knowledge. I benefit. It's all good. So what kind of radio should you get? Let me kind of show you what I have here. And if you can see back here, I have lots of radios because I kind of prepared for this. Actually, I wrote stuff down too, but I'm not following the script, so I guess it's going to be a little less organized. So if we talk about brands, brands equate to quality. Probably the absolute top brand when it comes to radios is the C. Crane radio. This is the CC Radio Plus. Really excellent AM, FM radio. However, very, very expensive. So even though this is probably the top dog brand built by people who love radio, if you're just needing an emergency radio, I wouldn't buy this because it's going to be $100 to $200. This particular radio was probably around $200 and probably unnecessary. Well, what about brand names? Well, I have a few of those here too. A couple of brands that you probably are familiar with Panasonic and Sony. They still make radios for the U.S. market, portable radios. Another brand that you may or may not heard of is called Sanjin. That's a Taiwanese brand, but Sanjin has been selling radios in the U.S. market for decades under different brand names like Radio Shack. In fact, they probably built this particular radio. They also made a very famous clock radio in the 1980s called the Proton under the Proton brand, a rebrand of one of their radios. So they make very, very good radios. Here's just an example of their radios. This was probably about $60, so it's not super cheap. This is the PRD4W. My only gripe with this radio would be that it might be a little bit too complicated for people that are just going to grab it in an emergency. It's an all-around excellent performer. Sounds good. Probably the best AM performance of all the radios, but it's just loaded with dials and things. So unless you're going to use this on a regular basis, I would avoid this and go with a simpler model. And by a simpler model, I mean something like, where's my radio? Oh, here, this Panasonic. So you look at this. This is one of the 2 Panasonic radios that's still sold in the U.S., but analog design, very, very simple, good quality radio. Sells for about $30 at Walmart, a little bit over $30. Don't necessarily buy this on Amazon. They'll charge you $40 or even $50, kind of price gouging. I'm not quite sure why. It's not worth that much. Definitely worth $30 though. So this is a pretty good radio. And of course, Sony makes good radios too. And they have about 5 models or so that they sell in the U.S. market. The level below the brand names that we're familiar with would be Kaito, K-A-I-T-O. That's a Chinese brand. They make some really excellent stuff, as good as the brand names, but they make some less excellent stuff too. I would say not as good. So you got to be a little bit careful with what you buy, but a good brand. Below that, there are a lot of kind of what I would say in English, my English listening ears, sort of bizarre sounding radios that I believe they're made in China, that I believe are really designed for other markets that are just sold here. So I have a few of those here too. This one's not so odd sounding. This is the QFX. Now I want to show you something. This looks exactly like, or pretty much exactly like, the Sony or the Panasonic radio, right? But it's not. The externals are the same. The internals are not the same. It's good enough, but it's not as good as the Panasonic. Another brand that we have is, I love the name of this brand. This is the actual brand name, not the model number. The brand name is 1A2BVV, and this is the JP1 model. This is not a bad radio, but its AM volume is not as loud as its FM volume for whatever reason. And then finally, we've got just another example. You're probably hearing me drifting out in the audio, sorry. This is the Prunus brand, another kind of odd-sounding brand. This is the J05 model. This one, the AM had a lot of pulsing on it. So in other words, a weak station that would fade in and out. It would really amplify that fading. It was pretty uncomfortable to listen to. All of these radios would work in an emergency. So whatever you got is fine. Don't worry about that. But I think the brand names work a little bit better. And I'm going to give you like a bottom line brand and all that too. People also might talk about transistor radios, these little guys here. These can be had for as little as under $10. This Benz, B-E-N-S-S, was about $9. Tinny speaker, hard to tune, but worked well enough. This Power Bear was a Amazon choice. However, it had the worst performance, although it was acceptable. It had the worst performance of any of the transistor radios that I tested, and I did quite a few. So I would say something like this. Don't always trust what Amazon says. This is another one, the Dream Sky. Kind of a bizarre name. This radio actually performed pretty well for its small size, and it had pretty good sound for its small size too. So it's the Dream Sky. I don't think it really even has a model number, but not too bad. But again, I personally would go with a larger radio with an analog dial, especially if you're not using it a lot. It's just going to be easier to use. So let's look at what they call these emergency radios and look at the pros and cons of those, and we'll talk about radio in general. So reaching back here again. We've got 2 radios here. These are the 2, if you wanted to go the emergency route, these are the 2 radios that I would recommend. This is the Kaito KA500, I think. You could look at the picture there. And then this is the CC Crane Solar Observer. Both of these have pretty good a radio reception, which is why you want a radio. You want it for its radio reception, not for the bells and whistles. And so I could recommend those. However, I think you can go with a cheaper radio and save some money, because a lot of the stuff in here is more gimmick than anything. Now, let me just show you. So this does have a little flashlight, not very bright, but it's useful. It's better than nothing. You might like that. This has AM and FM. And why do you need both AM and FM? Well, because in the world of radio, most people listen to FM. It sounds the best. It has the least amount of interference from like computers and phones and thunder crashes and things. But it's a line of sight transmission. It's in a band that is kind of line of sight. And so even a very powerful station is only going to go about 40 miles. A weaker station, like a little local station, much less than that. And so you could really be in a zone where there's no power for 40 miles. That could happen. And that's where AM comes in. So AM, as the old traditional band, AM uses a different frequency spectrum, and those waves can actually follow the curvature of the Earth, so a very powerful AM station can be heard even up to 100 miles away during the day. And at nighttime, those radio signals bounce off the ionosphere, and you can hear them very, very far. So in my Chicago location, it's easy at night for me to listen to stations from New York, Boston, Atlanta, New Orleans, Denver, Toronto, Minneapolis, and many other stations, because these are powerful stations bouncing. So some of those are almost 1,000 miles away. So it's pretty unlikely that a disaster would be more than 1,000 miles. So at least you could get some information in times of an emergency. Now, this radio also has weather band. Weather band is a frequency band that's above the FM broadcast band. There's about 1,000 weather band stations in the country, and they broadcast weather and time, the time and weather. But during times of an emergency, they can broadcast other information too. Weather band covers about 95% of the population, and so it could be an additional source of information. However, all the information from weather band gets channeled up through regular broadcast AM and FM, so it's really not absolutely necessary. The places that really use weather band are like schools and factories and airports and places like that. If you've ever got one of those alerts, tornado warning on your phone, that's weather band doing that. So it's an important resource, but not absolutely necessary for an emergency radio. This radio also has shortwave. So when I was a kid, I was a super avid shortwave listener. I think shortwave actually changed my life. And you could read that in my blog. Go back into my blog and read about that. But shortwave, in the day when I was a kid, there were dozens of international stations that broadcast in English. So I could listen to Canada, Quito, Ecuador, Cuba, South Africa, Russia, the Vatican, France, England, just dozens, China, dozens of countries, and hear their viewpoint in English. Now, most of those broadcasts are currently just streamed on the internet because they don't use the shortwave anymore. However, I did tune this particular radio on shortwave. I did find a couple of English stations. They were mostly religious broadcasters, and I found a bunch of Spanish stations. So if you speak Spanish, it might be more worthwhile than if you're just an English speaker like I am. Now, different parts of the world rely on shortwave more than others. So South America, parts of Asia, and Africa rely a lot more on shortwave than we do in the United States. So that might be an important feature that you would want on a radio. What I would say that people buy these radios for that are mostly just stupid, this has a little solar panel that's super tiny. It's not going to do much. It has a hand crank dynamo, which is a pain to turn. If you do it very vigorously, like, well, I can't even do it, but that really, really fast, for a minute, you get about 5 or 6 minutes play on the radio. I try to charge my cell phone with this. So I did 1 minute, and I went from 30% charge to 31% charge. So you would literally have to crank this thing for like an hour or two to get even a halfway decent charge. So mostly a gimmick. And this is all cheap plastic, even on this better quality radio. So, you do this for a couple of days of continual cranking, you're just going to break this thing off. So I think it's not necessary. If you like the idea of a radio, maybe because it has a rechargeable battery that you can charge like your cell phone, great, get it. I prefer, if you're going to go with an emergency radio, to get one that not only has just the rechargeable battery, but also takes regular batteries, so you have some flexibility. And you should note that AA batteries will typically give you approximately 50 hours of playtime. The kinds of batteries in these radios, D cells, they will give you up to 150, 200, or even more hours of playtime. So think about that. Even with 50 hours, that, if you're careful, that's well over a month's worth of important emergency listening. Compare that to your cell phone. My cell phone, I have an iPhone 10. It can't even go the whole day without having me plug it in someplace. So that's a tremendous difference. Again, the simplicity of the circuitry and the coverage. There's radio everywhere. Everywhere you're going to be, there's going to be radio. And if your local stations are out, you'll be able to get other radio stations. So the bottom line here is, go out after you watch this video, go on Amazon, go to Best Buy, go to Walmart, wherever, buy yourself a cheap, inexpensive radio. If you plan on using it regularly, then keep a spare set of batteries for emergencies. If you're not going to use it regularly, if it's just going to be an emergency device, don't keep the batteries in the radio. They'll leak and destroy the radio, but keep them maybe with a little masking tape or something stuck on the radio so you can easily get them in there. Again, I prefer a little bit larger radio. They're a little bit easier to tune and listen to, and I prefer an analog dial for people that are not radio aficionados, just because any person can operate a radio like this. You don't need a PhD in radio. But please do that. Be prepared. You can go as little as under $10 for a portable radio. Yes, you can spend a lot more, but if you spend even $30 or $40, you're going to get a really great radio. Any of the ones that I talked about here work well enough. I already gave you my spiel on which ones I think are better. Do it. Help yourself out. If you're a van dweller in the middle of nowhere, you absolutely need one of these things. But if you're a person in a condo or in a little apartment in New York City, you absolutely need one of these too. Take care, everyone. And if you get some time, either look at or listen to my podcast or read my blog. The blog is a lot more extensive. It has, like, for instance, I have all kind of pictures and reviews and stuff on this radio topic on the blog if you're interested in that. Otherwise, have a great day, and thank you so much. Subscribe, please, and please give me a thumbs up if you like it. If you don't like it, you can put a negative comment down, but if it's one of those BS, childish 12-year-old comments, I'll just delete it, so don't waste your time. Bye.